Coming up on Philosophy Talk.
Is belief in God perfectly rational?
As philosophers, we can approach this in a reasonable way. There are lots of more detailed questions that we might later ask about the nature of that which we want to worship. But the first question would be, is there some ground or underlying reason for this cosmos existing rather than not existing?
Is not believing in God irrational?
When we say something happened by chance, we're conceding, hey, we don't have any explanation for it at all.
Our guest is Philip Clayton from the Claremont Graduate University.
I'm offering a philosophical defense of the existence of God from the very Darwinian laws that have led to the evolution of highly complex intelligent systems like ourselves.
What if God was one of us? Just a slob like one of us.
Believing in God. Coming up on Philosophy Talk
after the news.
Welcome to Philosophy Talk, the program that questions everything.
Except your intelligence. I'm John Perry.
And I'm Ken Taylor. We're coming to you from the studios of 91.7 KALW Local Innovative Public Radio for San Francisco.
We're continuing conversations that begin at our home at Philosopher's Corner on the Stanford campus.
And they migrate from this oasis, that oasis of the air, that oasis of thought, to this oasis of the air, and from the air to the internet via our blog, theblog.philosophytalk.org. And also you can download our podcast of our program at our website. I've already weighed in on our blog, John, so I've gotten this conversation started already.
Yeah, Ken, you're a little dubious about how rational people can believe in God, but the arguments for the existence of God are as good as the arguments for induction or the value of philosophy or any of the arguments we base our life on. What's your problem?
Well, yeah, right. They're as good as those arguments. Look, there are lots of arguments for the existence of God, but I actually don't believe that very many people hold their religious belief on the basis of anything like those arguments. First of all, most of those arguments, not to put too fine a point on it, actually suck. I mean, they mostly suck. And so if people were to believe on that basis, they'd have no basis. But I just don't think that most people believe on that basis.
Well, there you go, throwing around technical, philosophical terminology like suck again. But let me make some distinctions here. The arguments for the existence of God, it seems to me, fall into three groups. One group is the totally, as we say in philosophy, a priori arguments, ones that just depend on logic, and that's mainly the ontological argument. God is by definition perfect. If he didn't exist, he wouldn't be perfect, so he must exist. That fascinates philosophers, but I don't think it convinces anybody. Then there's these arguments that are based on big cosmological principles, like the first cause or something like that. Those also intriguing, but I don't know that in this day and age they convince anyone.
They boggle the mind, I think.
But then there's the argument from design. I think that's in a class by itself. People look at the world and they say, could this all just be the result of nothing at all? Doesn't it bespeak of some intelligence for centuries? And even after Darwin, I think people are moved by that argument to religious belief. Maybe it's not the most common avenue, but at least for philosophical sorts, it often is in there.
Oh, look, I want to give the argument from design its due. I think before Darwin, if you weren't moved by the argument from design, I don't know if all the way to belief, but if you weren't moved by it, you were just pretending, because it's a powerful argument. But I think Darwin kind of smashes holes in it, right? But I still don't think, and I don't think most people believe on the basis of anything like the design argument. I think lots of believers think that they perceive God's presence in the world somehow directly. I had this girlfriend in college. She was a luminously good person. She was a very sincere believer. She did all kinds of good and caring things, and her religious belief was a main motivator. She just thought she felt the presence of God in the world. I think more believers are like that than based on reasoned argument.
I think a lot of believers kind of come at it in a way that philosophers find a bit paradoxical. We often look at the problem of evil as a reason for not believing in God. Why would he have created such a mess if he were perfect? But it's the evil in the world, in people's lives, or great things like the Holocaust, that moves many people to say, I just can't live in this world unless I think of all of this evil as having some meaning. So it's an interesting and deep topic.
Yeah, I'd like to know more about the basis of religious belief, the real basis. And to help us, our roving philosophical reporter, Polly Stryker, went to church to talk to some sincere believers. She files this report.
It's easy to find reasons why people don't believe in God, but try asking people why they do believe in God.
I believe in God because of the history of human development, the proof that things are getting better. Yes, we take a step backwards with war, but I've also seen the progress of women and the rise of environmentalism. I see the peace of God that is inside of us working toward that.
I was born believing in God. My parents and my grandparents and everybody before them were Presbyterians, and it was part of my upbringing. And then in my adulthood, I, for a while, stopped believing in God because I thought God was too exclusive. And I started studying Buddhism and Native American and many, many other names for God. And I finally realized that God could be a lot more inclusive.
It's involving myself with talking with what I think is God that brings me happiness. Of course, I don't necessarily even consider myself Christian, but God, yes.
I know that there is a force called God. I've seen it operate in my life, and I feel it. I've had several experiences. Once I was lying down, resting, not feeling too good, and this energy touched my head, and it said God, and I went, oh.
I think the moment when it became fact for me that I believed in God, there was a point in young adulthood. I was going through a very, very difficult emotional time. I had this conversation in my mind saying, the family doesn't care, my boss doesn't care, my friends don't care. And then all of a sudden, this little voice in my head very quietly said, I care.
There have been what I call minor miracles in my life. In 1972, lost my Eurail pass in Chartres. It was a windy, blowing day. I had not very much money. If I lost their Eurail pass, I'd be in trouble. Anne looked up to the heavens and said, God, please let us find her Eurail pass. She looks down in the gutter, and there it is.
Being able to explain, is there a God? You have to have faith that there is, and the difference between religion and science is that faith. I'm inspired by nature, or I'm inspired by the love that one person has for another, or the compassion that people share. And so that's what makes God real for me. It's seeing it in the everyday things, in the small details.
I studied physics. The examination of the entire universe and the rules that govern it, more specifically quantum physics, general relativity, special relativity, all of the incredibly beautiful rules that the universe adheres to makes me believe that there is a creator. So that's why I believe in God.
For Philosophy Talk, I'm Polly Stryker.
Thanks, Polly, for that interesting discussion with believers and near believers. This is Philosophy Talk. I'm John Perry. With me is Ken Taylor.
And we're joined today by Philip Clayton. He's professor of philosophy at Claremont Graduate University. This year, he's also a visiting professor of science and religion at Harvard University. He's author of God and Contemporary Science. Phil, welcome to Philosophy Talk.
Hi, Ken and John. Great to be here.
Hi, Phil. John Perry here.
Hi, John.
You're a philosopher of great repute, and you're also someone who's inclined to believe in God. Maybe you're a rabid believer, I'm not quite sure. But you must think that the arguments for the existence of God are at least helpful in grounding your belief. Tell us, what's your favorite? What's the most powerful argument, and why do you think it's good?
I think the argument that comes closest to the response of religious believers is what you called the teleological argument, the argument from design. If we see systems inside the world that are analogous to the sorts of systems that would be designed by an intelligent person, then it's natural for us to conclude that there must be some intelligent designer behind them. You know that William Paley in the early 19th century said, well, if you find a watch out on a beach somewhere, you're not going to think that that was put together by the forces of nature. And there are many systems in the natural world that have that similar design appearance to them.
Well, now, David Hume, writing a little bit before Paley, said, well, that may be true, but what reason would there be to believe that the designer of this watch was omnipotent, omniscient, and completely benevolent, or benevolent at all? Isn't there kind of a gap in the argument from design that goes from a designer to anything like the Christian God?
That's completely right. And the philosopher who's a theist, as I am, is interested to see what we can learn from the different rational arguments. What do they tell us about the nature of God? Is there any way they could work together to help give a philosophical defense for theism?
That sounds like you think that maybe no one does it, but kind of in company with one another, all the kind of various arguments, the design argument, the ontological argument, the new design arguments, from fine-tuning or something like that. They kind of gang up. Is that the kind of thing you're saying?
Be kind of like the Iraq War. Each argument for it is no good, but maybe together they're pretty convincing.
Yeah, is that what you're suggesting? I wasn't quite sure what you were suggesting.
I sure hope it's not like the case for the Iraq War, you guys. But no, it seems to me that we could learn different aspects of the nature of God from the different arguments that we can develop within philosophy. And each one tells part of the picture. If a person's a theist and is trying to be a philosopher at the same time, it's most rational for him to look at each one of those and see what parts of the picture they tell.
Okay, so help me. So the design argument, okay, now let's add that. So John talked about David Hume's critique of the limits of the design argument. You said, well, you come across this complexity in the universe and you think, my God, it seems very intricate, as if designed by an intelligent person. But we post-Darwinians, there's Richard Dawkins' Blind Watchmaker. Natural selection is an amazing designer of animal species, amazingly more clever than even human designers, right? Because I'm convinced that one of the keys to the survival of the human race is studying the intricate design of animals, of animal kind, of the whole biological world, because they've solved all these amazing problems about energy and all that sort of stuff. And it's just the work of natural selection. So right. So what stands from the design argument these days?
Yeah, a theist after Darwin can't say just because we have some structure that we find that it must have been directly designed by God. That was the way that Paley thought he could make the argument. But we still find regularities of succession, temporal orders, which together produce these amazingly intricate features of the natural world. And it seems to me that nothing in Darwin's position needs to force us to give up that conclusion. The best inference is that since these patterns over time are analogous to things which are products of human intelligence, that those patterns behind those patterns must lie some intelligent designer.
Well, now, before we dig a little deeper into this, let me just make a distinction here and see if I've got you right. Post-Darwinian discussions of the argument from design kind of, to me, fall into two groups. There are those who at one time called them creationists, now they call themselves design advocates, who think that there are gaps in Darwin's story and that you really need some theology to fill in the gaps. Now, I think that's not your position. Your position is not so much there's gaps in his theory, but you go to the beginning of it. What got this whole thing started? You still have a lot of complexity that's unaccounted for by natural selection. Do I have that kind of right?
Exactly. To try to argue, as this movement called intelligent design argues, that the best scientific answer is God is just absurd. That's confusing science and philosophy. But there are patterns in the natural world that raise philosophical questions. So I'm offering a philosophical defense of the existence of God from the very Darwinian laws that have led to the evolution of highly complex intelligent systems like ourselves.
So Leibniz had a somewhat different argument that said, look, the fact that there are laws of nature at all suggests that God exists. Is your position close to that?
Right. Now, if we want to talk about the laws themselves, we might want to make the transition to that second argument, the cosmological one. But I want to add that this argument from the incredible unlikelihood of, say, intelligent life like ourselves arising purely by chance, it seems that that argument has been massively strengthened by recent results in the sciences, this so-called fine-tuning argument, which would be fun to talk about.
We'll take that up maybe in a little bit. You're listening to Philosophy Talk. We're talking about belief in God. Our guest is Philip Clayton from the Claremont School of Theology and currently a visiting professor at Harvard University.
We've been examining the arguments for the existence of God, chiefly the teleological argument, and their power to ground religious belief. In the next segment, we'll go on for a bit about that, but then we're going to ask, does religious belief really need a grounding in reasoned argument at all? Where do you stand on this issue? You can join us by calling 415-841-4134. That's 415-841-4134.
Outside the Bay Area, you can join us by calling toll-free at 1-800-525-9917. We're putting faith, reason, and religious experience on the couch. Plus, we'll take your calls and emails when Philosophy Talk continues.
Well, it may be the devil or it may be the Lord, but you're gonna have to serve somebody. Serve somebody.
Bob Dylan and Gotta Serve Somebody. I'm John Perry, and this is Philosophy Talk, the program that questions everything
except your intelligence. I'm Ken Taylor. Today we're examining the belief in God. What is its basis? Do you believe in God? Why, if so? What's the basis of your belief? Did you argue yourself into that belief? Did you execute a leap of faith? Do you think you're in direct awareness? You have direct awareness of God's presence in the world?
The number, that's our number, not God's number, is 415-841-4134. That's 415-841-4134. And outside the Bay Area, you can call us toll-free at 1-800-525-9917. And finally, you can email us from anywhere in the world at comments@philosophytalk.org.
Our guest is Philip Clayton from the Claremont Graduate University and Harvard University. Phil, I know you want to talk about the kind of new design argument, this fine-tuning argument. I'll give you a chance to do that in a second, but I'm going to tell you that after you talk about that, I want to my real worry about these arguments for the existence of God is that the atheist and the theist can argue each other to a standstill. Suppose I could argue you to a standstill on this fine-tuning argument. Would that undermine the legitimacy of your religious belief or not? And why not? But if you want to tell us first about your fine-tuning argument, go ahead.
Let's do it in either direction. Which order do you want to do it in?
So just tell me more about the fine-tuning argument.
All right. Recently, we've realized that an incredibly large number of laws and fundamental physical constants had to be almost exactly the values they are in order for life to arise within the universe, or in order for us to be here at all. It's an argument called the anthropic argument for the existence of God. Things like the strong nuclear force, the weak nuclear force, the balance of nucleons to antinucleons had to be correct to the part of 100 billion in 1 to 100 billion.
Okay, let's grant that. What follows? So we're lucky. There's a great cosmic accident that is responsible ultimately for our being, because these things, these parameters are set somehow or other. These values are set somehow or other. And it's just a big fact at the bottom of the universe that they're set in a way that supports our being here. So what? What follows from that?
Just lucky is not an explanation. As philosophers, we look at things that we find around us, and then we ask, why? What might explain the universe being the way that it is? And we're open to wherever reason takes us. And it seems to me here, it's more likely, if we're looking for an explanation, that was ordered or designed than that it would simply emerge by chance.
Well, let me go back to Hume, and let me tell our listeners that a good place to start, in my opinion, on arguments for God is Hume's great dialogues on natural religion. And Hume, oddly enough, believed in the design argument. He just didn't think it proved a God existed that had all the Christian traits, and in particular, he didn't think there was any reason to think that God was benevolent. But earlier in his dialogues, before he comes to that conclusion, or what I take to be his conclusion, Hume says, look, you trace design back to God, but explanations come to an end. Don't you have to either now explain where God came from, or if you're going to end it there, why can't I just end it with, well, there's this lucky accident?
Exactly, Phil. I mean, explanation stops. And as a matter of fact, moreover, I'm going to add to the challenge. You're positing God to set these parameters doesn't advance us one bit, because all it does is put a big mystery, because we don't understand what God could do to set these parameters, or why he would set the parameters this way rather than that way, what his plan or purpose would be. That's all just a big mystery. So you actually replace one mystery, why are the parameters set, with another mystery, God setting the parameters this way, but leaving it totally mysterious how or why he would do it this way. So I don't think you've made any advance.
But Ken, I don't think that's right at all. We're very used to explanations in terms of intentions of persons or person-like agents. And there are many things in the world, like the studio I'm sitting in right now, that's here because a lot of people had intentions. And we also know things that happen sheerly by chance. When we say something happened by chance, we're conceding, hey, we don't have any explanation for it at all. So I think if the universe as a whole reflects the sort of patterning that would result from somebody having designed it or intended it to be there, that's where the philosopher should go.
Well, let me make a little segue to our next topic by saying, well, I think what Hume would say about that would be that, well, if you have an antecedent belief in God or some personal force with intentions and desires that acts on reason, that's present in the universe, then this fine-tuning argument gives you a good place to have that force enter into the things we study in science. But that would depend on this kind of antecedent inclination. Exactly. And so let's talk about that. I mean, in your case, is it really the fine-tuning argument that drove you to religion, or is it something that complements a picture you already had?
Let's put a little different. Let's extend that. I'm gonna jab this knife into you just a little bit. Suppose that I don't want to try and settle the design argument here, but suppose that I could argue you to a standstill. Suppose that rationally, the atheist and the theist just argue to a standstill. Would you, as theist, be? What would that do to the foundations of your belief? I mean, would you need to give them up or not? I mean, do you not need a winning argument or what?
Let's think about your opening segment. You had a lot of people speaking of some experience that they'd had that led them to believe in God. And many of the callers may want to emphasize some experience that they've had. But it seems to me that leaves a person really vulnerable if I can only appeal to experience. What if I now have a sort of non-God-like experience? Leaves me in a bad position. But philosophers love to take a place where arguments are difficult to formulate and see whether we can construct a case that pushes more in the one direction or the other. We'll take on questions that can't be solved by empirical means. And it seems to me that that's exactly the position that the person inclined to believe in a God or inclined not to believe in a God should take. Let's dive into it and see how we can do.
You're listening to Philosophy Talk. We're talking about the basis for believing in God with Phil Clayton from Claremont School of Theology. We'd like you to join this discussion, 415-841-4134. Outside the Bay Area, 1-800-525-9917. And Lee in San Francisco is on the line. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, Lee.
Thank you. Clearly, empirical evidence doesn't resolve this question. And what I am wondering is, why is it that those who believe always point to faith as the ultimate proof of the validity of their belief, and yet those who believe in the non-existence of God don't resort to that? I mean, I have faith that God does not exist, that barring there being ultimate proof, evidence thereof, one way or the other, I absolutely have positive faith that God does not exist.
Well, Lee, let me just have you follow it up a little. Is this faith bolstered by things like the problem of evil? You couldn't see how God could design such a mess of a world, or is
not
it
at all?
Not at all.
Not
just
at all.
Just faith.
Not at all. As somebody who's had children and who has experienced, let's say, biological determinism in a very profound way, and even before that, I really believe in the power of life. And I don't really understand why we need a God to provide us with this sense of miraculousness in life.
Well, I think children certainly are miracles. Children are great. They go through a difficult phase between about 2 and 50, I've noticed. But aside from that,
children, I'm not just resorting to that, but just birth and death and everything that has to do with life, to me, demonstrates that there's a kind of absolute power in life that I really need to look no farther.
Okay, Dorothy, you raised a lot of interesting questions. I want to thanks for the call. Oh, Lee, sorry. Thanks for the call. Phil, what do you want to say back to Lee?
Lee's call is a fantastic example of exactly what we're talking about. She wants to make it something of faith alone, whether on the theism or the anti-theism side. But in fact, she starts developing arguments. And I'd say let's bring those arguments out into the light of reason and see how they show. And it seems to me that over the long run, theism offers the stronger philosophical response.
But okay, so you buy into the view. You think religious belief should accept the challenge of being rationally grounded, at least as rationally grounded as other forms of believing that we have,
Precisely.
or being surrendered. Right.
Precisely, and it's listening to your programs that have convinced me of this, because as I hear atheists on the show, I see them sometimes offering strong arguments and sometimes just hand-waving, and it seems to me that what we need to do if we're going to talk about philosophy is to see the best arguments we can bring up and follow that force of the argument wherever it takes us.
Well, now let me ask you this. When we talk about God here, it seems to me there are some pretty strong arguments for there not being a perfect God, the ones that come from the problem of evil. Are you defending more or less the Christian God or just some more abstract conception of God?
I don't think that philosophy is in the position to defend something like a belief in a Trinity or that God became man at some point in history. I can't see any way to make that case philosophically, though I know people like Richard Swinburne at Oxford who've tried to make the case. But it does seem to me that if we ask the question, as a philosopher must, why is there this universe? Why is there something rather than nothing? That the God explanation is a pretty powerful philosophical response.
Dorothy in San Francisco is on the line. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, Dorothy. What's your comment or question?
Thank you. I wonder frequently when I'm hearing discussions on religion and the existence or non-existence of God, why the monotheistic model is what is used, rather than, let's say, an Eastern model or, sort of like maybe Native American spirituality, a different model. I think that the limiting it to the Judeo-Christian Islamic model is too limiting.
Well, Dorothy, I'm with you, and I'm going to take just a second to stick my own 2 cents in here. I think the religious impulse is a great one. It's responsible for a lot that's good in the world and takes us out of our petty concerns. But I think it's wasted on this cosmic creator of the laws or anything like the Christian God. We ought to worship something that would benefit from being worshipped. And I go for various forms of paganism. Worship the earth, worship water, worship the trees. But that's not a question. That's just my 2 cents.
But Dorothy, John, I think many things deserve reverence. And that's kind of connected to worship. But it's not. I don't think polytheism. Maybe it does have lots of going for it. So there are lots of religious traditions in the world. But when Christians start thinking about God, they think things like God is the sum of all perfections. So they think the sum of all perfections has to be a unity. And it's not like a silly thought if you're going to think this way. But Phil, what do you think?
As philosophers, we can approach this in a reasonable way. There are lots of more detailed questions that we might later ask about the nature of that which we want to worship. But the first question would be, is there some ground or underlying reason for this cosmos existing rather than not existing? And it seems to me that there's a strong case to be made. It's called the cosmological argument, that there is such a ground. Once we've all agreed on that, so once I've converted you two guys to believe that that's correct, then we can begin to say, well, will reason take us any further in the direction of Dorothy's interest?
Phil, let me ask you a question. What's so problematic about the universe itself, as it were, grounding itself, just existing, as it were, from all time? Now, how far back all time goes, whether it's infinite in extent or finite in extent, that's an interesting question. But what's more? It's no less mysterious to have the universe existing in itself, of itself, from all time, than to have God, who has to exist from all time, causing the universe at some... I don't see that God reduces any mysteries. I just don't see that if you're taking an explanatory tack, I don't see that you've gained any leg up.
I suspect Phil thinks that there's something about the physical universe considered as a whole that just doesn't make sense to be a kind of self-sustaining thing. Is that the argument, Phil?
That's right. If you take this whole infinite series of finite causes that we could study in physics as we go back toward the Big Bang or something, there's no single point where we want to say, now that state of the universe is the sort of thing that would be a good candidate for being self-caused.
Do you think that at every moment God has to sustain the universe? I mean, once it gets going, does it need God to sustain it? If it doesn't need God to sustain it in its transition from state to state, I don't see why it ever needs God to sustain it. Why would that be?
I actually think it's a completely intuitive position to say that the universe is a contingent existent. It's the kind of thing that might not have existed. And as soon as I think of the universe as contingent, it gives rise to the thought of something which exists by necessity that could not be otherwise in existence.
Let's get some callers in here. Paul in San Francisco's next. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, Paul.
Oh, hey, thanks for taking my call. I guess for myself, I'm not a theist or atheist or even an agnostic. And
so you're just a wimp, just an undecisive wimp, Paul?
Well, that's my position too, Paul, so go ahead with your question.
And to me the important issue is not one's belief in God or what argument warrants one's belief, but rather the fact, at least as I see it, that such beliefs have no logical consequences that are, non-trivial. And I guess, for me, it's just irrelevant. It doesn't really make any difference whether you believe in God or don't believe in God or don't even have an opinion about it, because the consequences of that belief for other areas of your life are not, necessarily anything. And I think that a lot of the discussion about this hinges on this, acceptance that, whether we have a belief in God or not, has some sort of import for, something else.
Well, Paul, I think that's a very good point. I'm going to sound like a broken record here, but there's a Humean element there too. Suppose we're convinced in Phil's God that this fine tuner who decided it was good to have a universe and to exist necessarily. Do we have any reason, any philosophical reason to believe that fellow wants to be recognized, that he cares about us, that we're not just kind of a spandrel in something going on much more important in the universe, that he does? I mean, is there any reason to care about the existence of this being?
Good question. Phil, what do you think? I love John's question for you.
Well, let's start with Paul's worry. We're having a very abstract discussion, typical of philosophy. And yet it seems to me it's a discussion with huge existential import. Because if I become convinced, as I am, that there's a being behind the universe who represents all goodness and who created the universe with some sort of an intention, that has everything to do with how I live my life.
Well, where did that all goodness come from? Isn't goodness a human concept? Why do you know that he represents all goodness?
In a series of arguments in the tradition called the ontological arguments, the argument is that God, this being, must have all perfections. And one tries to argue from the very idea of God that we have reason to think that such a being must exist.
See, now I understand how your tag team works. First you get the teleological argument to get him existing. You say that doesn't settle anything about his nature, but it tells something about his existence. Then you use the ontological argument to tell us more about his nature. But we'll come back to this. You're listening to Philosophy Talk. We're discussing belief in God with Philip Clayton from the Claremont School of Theology. And this year he's a visiting professor at Harvard.
We've been examining alternative ways of arriving at religious belief. In our next segment, we'll talk about maintaining religious belief in the face of the challenges of the modern scientific world.
Doubt, dogma, and faith, plus more of your calls and emails when Philosophy Talk continues.
XTC and Dear God. Can you know, from Bach to Bob Dylan and XTC, religious music is one great justification for religion. This is Philosophy Talk, and I'm John Perry.
And I'm Ken Taylor, and I was going to say, every time we do a show in science, we struggle to find good music, but every time we do a show in religion, we find great music. So maybe religion wins and science loses.
There's a message there.
Yeah. Have you ever had a crisis of faith? Ever been gripped by ceaseless doubt despite your religious conviction? How did your crisis resolve itself, if it did? And what lesson did you learn about the nature of belief, faith, and doubt in the process?
Now, you're not listening to a religious program. You're listening to Philosophy Talk, but we're discussing religion. Share your story, 415-841-4134. That's 415-841-4134. Outside the Bay Area, you can call us toll-free at 1-800-525-9917. And finally, you can email us from anywhere in the world, comments at philosophytalk.org.
We're discussing belief in God with Philip Clayton from the Claremont School of Theology and Harvard University. Phil, look, modern life presents lots of challenges from all directions to religious conviction, it seems to me. Modern physics and modern biology, I believe, undermine much, maybe not all, but much of the explanatory power of religion. The horrors of the 20th century and the continuing horrors of this century undermine the belief that history is guided by a loving, providential God who guides all to the good, who's there for us around the corner. Here's my question to you. Look at the world clear-eyed. How could a person who does that, shouldn't a person who does that at least be seized with doubt about the existence of God?
I don't think a person should have doubt about the existence of some sort of ultimate metaphysical principle, but I'd have to say there are a lot of traditional religious beliefs that are going to be hard to justify. For example, the belief that God steps in on a periodic basis to help us to break natural laws, to help us with little details of our lives, finding a parking spot or something. And that's the kind of belief I don't think that one will be able to defend philosophically or scientifically. But that's very different from this more fundamental metaphysical position that separates my view from yours. And there it seems to me the theist is still on strong ground.
John in San Francisco is on the line. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, John.
Oh, hi, and thanks for taking my call, although I might be one segment too late. I wanted to tell my story about why I came to believe in God, and not some vague principle, but the actual Christian God, and it's this. If we look at drama as it manifests itself in the works of every different society through time, we find one principle in common, with a few exceptions, and that is that playwrights write and audience appreciatively receive drama in which, at the end, good triumphs over evil. This seems to reflect an innate part of our nature, which I attribute to God and the search for God. Evil can often be more strong, more efficient, more interesting, but audiences always reject, with few exceptions, from our modern era, evil triumphing over good. Movies would flop, plays would be unseen, and works of literature wouldn't be read if in every dramatic situation Hitler won the war, etc.
John, I take your point, and I think it's a good point, but I think it points to something, and I think it points to something deep and profound about human beings. We aspire. We have certain aspirations for how the world should be. We want the world to be a world in which the good will out, in which good triumphs over evil. That is one of our deepest human aspirations. But that doesn't justify the belief in God. You know, God may not be there. He may be non-existent. We still have this aspiration, and that belief in God may be nothing but wishful thinking.
But
wishful thinking guides a lot of human affairs. A lot.
If you were just biological, if this was just triumph of the fittest, there wouldn't be that principle.
Oh, I don't see why that's so. I don't see why that's so. But let's let Phil weigh in here. What do you think, Phil? How much, if any, religious belief is grounded in mere wishful thinking? I'll put an edge to the question to you.
Oh, none of it. But John's bringing up what we know in the tradition as Kant's moral argument for the existence of God.
Right.
I'm afraid I can't make an argument for that in debate with you guys, because you'd say, well, sure, maybe if the universe is going to be moral and right in the end, there has to be a divine lawgiver and an ultimate punisher. But maybe the universe isn't moral in the end. Maybe those aspirations for goodness that we all have, as John says, are futile and empty. And since I can't show that that's the case, I can't prove the existence of God.
But maybe you could do this. What do you think about this? We had a guest on our show about the meaning of life who says he doesn't believe in God, really. He didn't quite put it that way, but he said he doesn't really quite believe in God, but he posits God. He posits God as a great cosmic partner, and the positing is the source of the meaningfulness of his life. So he was kind of a fictionalist. It doesn't really give real belief, but there's a point to the positing, and he would never give up the positing in face of any argument.
Now, that's a fascinating argument, a very distinctively modern, contemporary argument, sort of the argument from meaning, that I have the sense that if we're just randomly thrown in here, then the life can't be meaningful in any ultimate sense. But if we're at home in the universe, we could be at home in the universe if it was in some sense designed or created for us. And I think that there's powerful reasons to think that intuition is right.
And that would withstand the decisive refutation that this belief could not be grounded in fact or reason or experience, because you say, so what? I need to live my life. I posited out of a practical need to live my life.
Yeah, but the entailment is interesting, isn't it? If my life is to be meaningful, there must be some grounding or reason for us to be here. It must have a purpose.
Yeah,
right? And then you can say, well, I don't think it has a purpose, so I don't accept such a God.
Some of you guys must feel more at home in the universe than I do. I don't feel very at home in the universe that modern science has given us. It looks like we're way off in a corner of an irrelevant galaxy, and it's hard to think of this as something that was focused on our lives.
We have time for one last caller if you promise to be quick, Kurt. Kurt.
Hi. Well,
you got to be succinct.
You just touched on what I was thinking. I was thinking of Kant and how in his early life he disproved the existence of God, and then in his later life he basically, if my understanding is correct, believed God exists because there's a human need for a God, and that's enough reason for the existence.
Phil, you want to respond to that? This will be your last word, or respond to whatever you like in your last word.
Yeah, the science question is fascinating, isn't it? People like Richard Dawkins and Stephen Weinberg tell us science has made belief in God impossible. But there's another part of science which, it seems to me, keeps the God question alive for those of us who are philosophers, and that is, what is the reason for the incredible pattern, the incredible beauty, the incredible mathematical nature of this universe? And it keeps alive that intuition. Perhaps the best explanation for that is some sort of personal being underlying it.
Well, Phil, this has been a fascinating discussion. It's gone by too quickly. We'll have to have you back and talk about this some more, but thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, you guys. Have a great day.
Our guest has been Philip Clayton. He's a professor of philosophy from the Claremont Graduate University. He's currently visiting professor of science and religion at Harvard, and he's author of the fascinating book, God and Contemporary Science.
We want to thank all the callers we didn't get a chance to talk to. We've got a long list of callers today we couldn't get to, and because of all the callers, we didn't get to any emails. Sorry about all that, but we appreciate your listening and contributing.
Yeah, so we got all these callers. They didn't go to church, but when we talk about God, they wanted to jump in here. Sunday morning for the unchurched here.
They may have gone to early mass.
Yeah, there you go. So, John, where's your head today? What are you thinking?
Well, philosophy of religion and arguments for the existence of God and the problem of evil are one thing I really enjoy about philosophy. I teach them in introductory courses all the time, and my own life has been back and forth on religious issues. Talking to a really articulate, calm, non-doctrinaire, but very determined and metaphysically principled person like Phil Clayton is really a treat.
Yeah. I agree. Look, I don't really think there are any reasoned arguments that should compel any rational person just if they consider them to believe in God. But I don't see religious belief as therefore mere unreason. Therefore, because I think it just goes deeper than that. I think it's deeply connected to these human aspirations. And if I were to be any kind of believer, I think I would be a fictionalist, where we posit God in order to articulate our felt sense of meaning in the world, our felt sense of somehow belonging in the world, even though we can't find an ultimate ground for it. So,
well, I think if we're going to do that, we ought to focus all these energies and quests for meaning on something that which could benefit.
I agree.
It could benefit us. So I say worship the earth. That's
that's
my mantra.
I agree about that. Some people think that atheism leaves no room for reverence of anything. But I think that's wrong. I think even in the absence of God, many things deserve reverence. The human spirit deserves reverence, all sorts of things. But you know what? This conversation continues on our blog, the blog.philosophytalk.org, where our motto is Cogito Ergo Blogo. I've already weighed in, and so go check it out.
You can also download podcasts of our program. Go to our website and follow the links. We appreciate your listening and hope you download some of those podcasts.
Yeah, you can go check out my blog. It's a fascinating thing. I talk about the different varieties of religious belief, some reasoned arguments, religious experience, the leap of faith. We didn't really talk about the leap of faith, the Kierkegaardian troubadour of faith. John, you know what? I was up really late last night, and I was at this party, and my head just won't stop pounding. I just don't think I can do the show today.
Well, since your head is drumming anyway, let's do a conundrum.
Oh, that's a good idea. And we have a caller on the line now. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, Rob.
Hello.
Hi, Rob. Where are you calling from?
I'm calling from Faversham in the United Kingdom because we have a little group here that meets in the Three Tons pub called the Faversham Stoa. And we discuss philosophy once a month, and we often use some of the material on your broadcast. So it's very similar topics.
Oh, that's great.
What's your conundrum, Rob? How can we help you?
My conundrum's this. When I was an adolescent in the 1960s, I was very religious, and I used to attend church regularly. Now, this was quite voluntary. There was no pressure from my family, and it wasn't part of the tradition of the family. It was straight from my heart, and I was very committed. And eventually, in my mid-20s, I went to university, and I studied philosophy with a minor in theology.
Good for
and
you.
Through those studies, I came to the conclusion that there is no supernatural world and no supreme agency, creating and guiding the world. And at that point, I came to describe myself as an atheist. So I stopped going to church for a few years, but then I resumed going in my 30s. And I find now that I'm quite able to attend worship without any belief that there's an objective supernatural reality. I'm not an agnostic. I'm quite clear, that I'm an atheist. But I find I can interpret religious worship in a completely naturalistic and sort of humanistic manner. So my conundrum is, should I really be attending church worship when I'm not a believer like other people?
I think your problem here is you think you know you're an atheist. But how can you know you're an atheist? Because to be an atheist is to not believe in God, and a non-belief in God has to be a non-belief in God according to some conception of God. But, consider Paul Tillich or all those guys like that. Do you have an ultimate concern? Maybe Manchester United or something like that?
Oh, so you're trying to convince Rob that he's not really an atheist?
I think he should describe himself as a semantic agnostic.
Oh.
I've never heard that term.
Yeah, you know exactly what you believe. You just have no idea whether it counts as belief in God.
I don't think being what did you call it?
Semantic agnostic
helps any, because
you're a philosopher of language. This is a whole new field for us. Semantic agnosticism.
I know, but it doesn't help with the fundamental conundrum any, because there must be some kind of confession of faith that you have to articulate.
I believe in one God, Almighty, Maker of heaven and earth.
I'm sure with a little philosophy of language and liquor, we could deal with that.
But let me ask you: you think that most people who go to church positively believe in their heart of hearts? You don't think that most of them have moments of deep doubt, despair, seasons of disbelief, and they go because of the? I'm surprised that they don't say, you know what, I'm going through this too.
It's not really doubt, is it? Because I'm saying I'm fairly clear about my interpretation. I do think of God as a kind of symbol, if you like, or a flag, that we hold, which represents our deepest values. And I think that, going to church, you can reflect on your fundamental values, you can express gratitude, you can reflect on how far you've lived up to your ideals, and so on. Can I read religion in a kind of poetic way, as expressive?
Why can't you?
Okay.
But the thing about religion and churches is that they are one of the few places in our society and culture, at least American society and culture, that constantly harangues you about the good, about thinking about things larger than yourself, about contemplating the mystery of life and existence. And even if they got the metaphysics, still I think that haranguing has some point. And why can't one go and expose oneself to that haranguing?
Here's my advice. So, there's two things. When they say, what's your religious belief, Rob, you should say, just what you said before. It was quite beautiful. I believe God is the personification of all the deepest human values, and I'm really committed to those.
Yeah.
And then, under your breath to yourself, say, but of course, he doesn't exist. If there was a church of Sherlock Holmes and they had good hymns and little recitations from the works of Conan Doyle, and everybody gathered and had good fellowship once a week and used that as a way of expressing their devotion to good investigative techniques.
Yeah.
Who could complain?
No,
and that's the way you're looking at the Anglican Church, which is probably the way Henry VIII looked at it anyway.
So I don't know if we've helped you clear up this existential crisis of yours, but it's been a lot of fun talking to you.
To offer to people when they ask me questions. That's good.
Okay.
Right.
Thanks a lot, Rob. That was
Thank
great.
you very much. I shall carry on listening. See you.
Okay. If you have a philosophical problem or quandary that's affecting your work or your play or keeping you awake at nights, John and I would be happy to lend an ear and maybe give you some sound advice.
Go to the Philosophy Talk website and poke the conundrums button with your mouse, or just send an email to conundrums@philosophytalk.org. Philosophy Talk is a presentation of Ben Manila Productions and the trustees of Leland Stanford Junior University, copyright 2006.
Our executive producer is David Demarest.
Special thanks to Devin Strolovich, Neil Van Leeuwen, Ben Temshin, and Mark Stone. Our senior consulting producer is Gordon Earl.
Support for Philosophy Talk comes from various groups at Stanford University.
Also from the Friends of Philosophy Talk and the members of KALW Local Public Radio, San Francisco, where our program originates.
The views expressed or misexpressed in this program do not necessarily represent the opinions of Stanford University or of our other funders.
The conversation continues on our website, www.philosophytalk.org. I'm John Perry.
And I'm Ken Taylor. Thank you for listening.
And thank you for thinking.